Well, good everybody. I'm up to speed now. It's just coming up to 6 o'clock in 7 minutes here in Les Abdelone in the evening, that is. And yes, the clocks did change this morning about 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And so I'm going to do the Q&A now, give you all the answers of questions here that I haven't actually seen yet. I've only seen a couple of the questions here. So I've got no idea what's coming up. But anyway. And yeah, the sun's still shining. It's early afternoon. I thought, oh, jeepers. I said I was going to do it, and I've been busy doing all sorts of stuff. So here we go. Okay, so Christoph, first question here. The small replicas of Joshua, will they be available to buy? Yes, they are. They'll be trophies for the winners of the GGR this edition. You know, in the first edition we had Suhaili replicas, so there's Joshua replicas, and you can buy them, and I think if I remember rightly, it's 1150 or 1200 euro delivered anywhere in the world, quite literally. So I'll get all the data for next week in case someone wants to buy one, and it comes with a special plaque and all the rest of it. They're limited edition. We're doing 100, but we've only gone through about 12 of the Suhaili models, and we've only done 2 of the Joshua models. So we haven't been pushing it really hard because we've been so busy. And of that money coming for Joshua, 200 euro of that goes to, I think it's 200 euro, goes to help preserve and help with the refit on Joshua itself. So that's the story there. Petria, is the twin mainsheet system an answer to previous traveller problems? This is a lot of the boats in the GGR. Instead of having one mainsheet, they've got 2 block and tackle with no traveller at all. They've just got one tackle system on starboard side of the cockpit, one on port side. Or is there some other reason for it? The windward or lazy mainsheet system seems to be a nuisance. Yeah, there's some really, first of all, you're not racing around the buoys. You're not racing, doing fast tacks and trying to get around a buoy and head to the finish line after a few hours. You're actually sailing around the world. So you're effectively cruising. It's like ocean voyaging, ocean cruising. And, obviously you're up to speed if you get your sail shape right and all the rest of it, but you've got a bit of time to react, because the name of the game for the GGR is not to make mistakes. Let other people make mistakes, and then you'll pass them because they've made mistakes. Simon's a classic case where he's performing really well. So he's gaining places, because he's got very good racing sails. I've always said that from the very beginning. Reasonably lightly prepared boat. It's a heavy boat, but he hasn't wasted weight on it. And he knows how to sail, and he holds his course. So he's quite fast. But the other way is when someone makes a mistake, obviously you're going to cruise past. And that comes down to the way you do your sail changes and the way you set your boat up. Keep it simple, keep it strong, and so on. So having a 2 mainsheet system is not a worry at all, because you basically connect the back of the boat. They're off center, so if you're going to windward, you can still strap your mainsail down and flatten it out, even without being in the center, because some single mainsheet systems have just got one dead eye or something on the center line, but that restricts what you do. So you can actually position the boom anywhere you want, especially if it's over the top of those 2 bolts. You can have it here, there, or wherever. And because you triangulate down like that, the boom doesn't wobble around either. So if you're up against it to stand up against the boom to furl the main and tie it up, the boom is locked in position, doesn't move. And you can do all the same things you do with a main sheet traveller, but then you've got nothing. When you don't have a main sheet traveller, you've got a free cockpit and so on. So it actually makes a lot of sense. And for the sort of event that the GGR is, you just simply don't need a traveller. So that's why they've done it. And you've doubled up as well. So if something lets go, like a shackle comes undone or something like that, it's not the end of the world. You're still connected to the boom. In fact, I'm just looking out the door here. My little mini here is Trekker. And one of the guys who helped me prepare Trekker, Pete, was it Pete? Yeah, jeepers, I've forgotten his name now. He's building one. And he's an aircraft engineer. And every one of my blocks on the boat was seized off like twisted wires, exactly the way they do it on aircraft, because a lot of things are seized on aircraft, and it's still all there. But there's only 2 things I didn't do it to, and both of them came undone when I was going across the Atlantic. So it was kind of interesting. It is a good idea to make sure all your shackles are seized and all that sort of stuff. So anyway, that's the idea of the twin mainsheet system. Okay, Dean, if Ian had not called in a code orange, used his GPS, called his manager, but instead sought refuge and anchored unassisted to make repairs, then continue on, would he still be in the GGR? Well, no, he'd be in Chichester. There's various ways you can get into Chichester. If you use your phone inadvertently, and we think it was an accident or some other particular reason of grey area, your first offence for using your phone is an 18-hour time penalty. Second offence could be a really severe penalty, depending on the circumstance, or actually going to Chichester class. It's the default position when you make a really big mistake with the notice of race, not by accident, but on purpose. You actually move to Chichester class. And same as the GPS. If you damage your sextant, drop it overboard or whatever, and you can't use your sextant, then you're going to have to break open your GPS. Now, in real terms, in 68, if you couldn't use your sextant and didn't know how to work out where you were, you got a big problem. So you'd have to make for the next piece of land. You could be pretty demanding to go around the world without a sextant. So that makes you a Chichester again. So all of those things are Chichester. You're still in the event, right, as a Chichester sailor, but you're not in the rankings and all that sort of stuff. So you're just sailing home with a one-stop situation. And in fact, I got to tell you a funny story. I'm just waiting for the official word, but I just got an unofficial call. Jade's manager and everyone's been doing the logistics. Ian is actually not going into Port Williams now because there's some friends there, and I've got their names there, I should tell you. Some friends of Kirsten's and Skip Novak, who Kirsten was sort of working with, doing a lot of charters in the Antarctic and up in the Arctic and all that, have a lot of contacts in Ushuaia. And I think what's happened is, in fact, I know what's happened is one of their mates, their collective mates, who've got a big boat down there, sailing boat, they actually went out and met Ian and helped him come into the anchorage. And now his boat is like a bit of a workshop. He's got everything there. And the word is that Ian managed obviously to fit his new, I think he's got a spare rudder, a spare Hydrovane rudder. He managed to get that on. There was apparently no real damage to the shaft, the main steering shaft that the blade connects onto. There might have been some damage to some bearings on there, but they've managed to make new bearings on the boat right next to him that he's tied up to. And the bent arm inside the gearbox, more or less, of the Hydrovane, which could have got overloaded as well with the rope on the drogue. They've managed to straighten that, put it all back together. So Ian could be underway again in a few hours, but he's going to ring. I told him, we're not supposed to say anything on social media until he rings and so on and goes from there. So it will still be Chichester. He's still got a one-stop situation, and he's had a bit of assistance, but that's all good. And he may be setting sail very soon in a number of hours. So maybe today, daylight, I'm not sure. I'm waiting for Ian to tell me direct. Okay, so okay, next one from John. Question about the website homepage. Why isn't there a title to get to the Q&As? I only see a title to get to the tracker update. It's a good point. The Q&As are meant to be a random thing, but they turn into being a bit of a weekly thing. When I think I answer all your questions, so there's no one's going to have any questions this week. And so a couple of times, or we've been busy and I haven't been able to do it. But it's a good point. It's a pretty regular thing, and I seem to get 20 or 30 questions or something. So we may drop that off into a separate segment. At the moment, they're just going the lives on the tracker. But I'll talk to John about that. He's busy for the next couple of days, but we may do that. So it's a good point. So you can see all the question and answers. Boy, that'll keep busy for a while. John Edward, Don, what's your biggest challenge for you without Jane Zhu by your side? Oh, work because Jane's in China. She's just packing her bag. She'll be back. She'll be back on Tuesday. But yeah, probably missing the timeline that daylight saving came in today. That's one thing. No, we still work. I'm in contact with Jane regularly on WeChat, which is a Chinese thing, and she's still doing stuff all the time. If I need something, it's there, or if I can't find something, she'll send it to me and things like that. So I got to do the dishes and I got to cook with myself and things like that. But no, everything's cool. Okay, Andrew, question. There's a big one. Why did Ian have his emergency electronic tiller pilot set up to connect to his Hydrovane and not his main rudder? It's a good point in the fact that the idea, first of all, I've got to say that the issue of having an electric autopilot on board has got nothing to do with the GGR. We don't tell entrants they have to have that, but what we decided after the last edition in 2018 is that we would allow them to carry an electronic autopilot, okay, for emergency situations. And if they used it Any other time, then they'd get severely penalised. So it's only there if they get wiped out for some reason and need it. Now, so it's voluntary. Some of them had them. I think probably about a third of the fleet has an electronic autopilot sealed in a bag with a seal that if they break the seal, they're in trouble. And we don't take it any further than that. In fact, I didn't even know whether Ian had one or not because I don't do the safety inspections. I manage all the rules and regulations. But we have a team that goes down, ticks the box and seals things up. Turns out he has one, but it's a tiller pilot with an extendable arm back and forward, and he's got wheel steering. So he's using that. He sets that up on the vane, on the rudder of the hydrovane, and then the hydrovane has a little tiller comes out, and you can actually steer the boat using that little tiller. And he probably thought, okay, well, if I damage the head or the gearbox or something like that, I can use the electric autopilot. In this case, he damaged the rudder, so he can't use the electric autopilot. That's bad luck. So we don't specify anything to do with that. That's just for emergency use, and that'll be the case in 2026 as well. Discussion, totally understand the principle. Yeah, that's sort of given there's only a break in the safety seal, kind of emergency steering in the event of failure, probably a Windvane. Yeah, that's exactly right. So, but we won't start specifying what entrants have to do with their electric autopilot. That's a safety thing for them, or risk minimization for them to decide what they want to do. We don't want to. I really hesitate. Our notice of race is like 48 pages full of rules and regulations, which are all about making a sensible event. Some things we allow, and we don't want to have more regulations and rules because that makes all the boats the same then. So we're not going to change that one. Sene, the final route in the North Atlantic seems to be going northwest over the Azores, rather than along the coast through the Canaries. Are there times of the year when the coastal route is more viable? Yes, the short story are that generally you get a northeasterly trade wind getting up from the equator, and then you come into the impact of what's happening in the North Atlantic with the pressure systems coming across, and that'll dictate what the route might be. And generally, most of the boats will make for the Cape Verdes, okay, and then from there they'll ease around and head across, and get out to the Azores and blah blah blah. So sometimes it is viable to go into the coast, but it's pretty risky, especially if you don't have weather forecasts. If you don't have weather forecasts in this next leg going up the Atlantic, you're far better off taking the traditional sailing ship routes, which is just do the best you can, get up there and stay away from the coast because you're going to get trapped in there if it all goes pear-shaped. So, but every season potentially different. This year's been a little bit different as well. So who knows? Ruth, in your opinion, who's got the fastest boat between Abelish, Kirsten, and Simon, especially in the trade winds coming up? Could be an interesting race to the finish. It already is an interesting race to the finish. So first of all, you're just talking about boat, okay? And I would have to say that for this next leg, Kirsten hasn't got the fastest boat, in my opinion. She's got waterline length, but she's got a lot of wetted surface area. That's a lot of hull touching the water underneath, and she's quite heavy. She has got a lot of sail area, but they still don't balance out quite the same way. Also, her bow is really powerful. What I call powerful, it's got a lot of buoyancy and so on. So she's got waterline length, but going to windward, none of that's an advantage going to windward. A Rustler 36 has got a really fine bow. The keel sort of cut back a little bit on the forefoot, and it's a ton and a half lighter than Kirsten, and it's pretty sensible sort of boat. You put that alongside the Biscay 36. The Biscay 36, technically, I wouldn't call it as powerful. The buttocks, down the stern sections aren't as full. So it hasn't got as much form stability in that sense. The hull shape is a little bit more wine glass than being sort of boom in and down with the keel. So you'd have to normally say that, the Rustler 36 is probably a little bit faster than the Biscay 36. Now, that's where the story ends, but it answers your question. I'd say probably, that's it. I'd say Rustler 36, Biscay 36, and then Cape George 36. But the reality then is that there's this matrix, and the next one comes. It gets very complicated. You've got the sailor. That's the first bit. You've got the condition of the boat. What's working, what's not, and then you've got the sails. Whether they're really good sails or just sort of ocean cruising sails. And then you've got the mentality and the mindset of the skipper. And then you've got the matrix with the weather as well. They're all going to be in the same weather very soon, but that's it. But yeah, to answer the question, I really think that there's that's it. Russell 36, Biscay 36, and then Cape George 36. But let's just see what happens. Matt Johnson, can the YB3 be used to get weather files in the real world or Chichester? The YB3 is the little satellite transmitting pinger that sends the positions every 4 hours to the tracker, okay? And it does do texting messages, so you can do the tweets on that as well. But you can't actually download grid files like you can do on an Iridium Go or some of the other Garmin. Is that long since I forget the name of it now, but there's a Garmin tracker that you can have, which is a similar system, and it allows you to download grid files as well. But the YB3 at the moment, the way they're restricted, because we lose some of the features, we block some of the features to stop them seeing the GPS and a few other things. You can't do any of that. So the Iridium Go is a full-featured unit. You can do everything with that. It's you can do all your texting and messaging a lot easier, a lot simpler. You can use your iPhone link to that. You can still use an iPhone link to a YB3 if you were to buy one for your own cruising boat, and you can use the keyboard on your iPhone to act as like a satellite transmitting iPhone effectively. So the YB, the yellow brick is pretty good. It's hardened and the battery lasts a huge amount of time if you're tracking and stuff. So, but we've restricted some of those features. Okay, D. Richards. If a GGR sailor makes contact with a ship, are they allowed to ask about positions of other competitors? Yes, they can. The rule of an unassociated ship is quite simply open for anything goes. Okay, so an entrant could ask them to get onto Windy, if they got computer and internet on the ship, get onto Windy TY and give them all the information in the world. They can talk about if they say, can you get on the GGR website, get on the tracker and give me the latitude and longitude of every boat in the fleet. That's completely legal. Because of the history and culture of the mariners at sea, you're always assisting each other at sea. So there's no restrictions on that. So they could do it. If it's an associated ship, like say Tapio, for instance, if he's got a shipping company that's one of his partners, if he organised to have a company ship rendezvous every month and give him all this information, that's illegal. That's banned because he's associated and it's been set up specifically for the task. So that's that one. Tyler, how the hell does Simon sail such a straight course? Well, it's very simple. It's something we spoke about a lot. There's two extremes here. The two extremes in the fleet right from the very beginning of this adventure. One is Simon, the other's Ian. Okay, Ian's what I call the gentleman sailor, and he likes to keep the boat comfortable. And instead of going for home, he'll turn the boat just to keep it comfortable in the waves. So if home is that way, and he's more comfortable going this way, he's going to go that way. Okay, and so his course is going like this, and that's a hugely slow or extra miles. Whereas Simon is a racing sailor. He knows all about vector made good and velocity made good towards the finish and things like that. So he'll do everything he can to keep the boat going straight to the destination or whatever the next waypoint is. And that means trimming the sails and putting up with an uncomfortable boat because that's where you want to go. But if he wants to go quiet, he could have gone off that way and it's really comfortable and you can have another cup of tea. But that's the beauty of the GGR. There's all this color. There's different sailors, different types of boats, all that sort of stuff, and different objectives, to be there. So that's the reality. Simon is really, he's cruising, but he doesn't know how to cruise slow. That's the short one. Goog has the same boat, which is kecked rig, though. Just really impressive with Simon's lines. Absolutely. I mean, Goog's boat is exactly the same hull. It's a little bit heavier, obviously, and it's a little bit more complicated, but Goog's sailing that boat really well. And I'd put Goog down. He's not necessarily as competitive as Simon might be, but he's sailing really well. And he's getting good miles out of the boat. He's still in touch. He's, like 1,200 miles behind or something. That's not bad after 24,000, 23,000 miles or so. He's doing pretty well. And the thing with Goog is that he's had very little failures, touch wood. And he's managing it all really well. It's very shipshape and all the rest of it. So he's doing pretty well. Okay, go right. I'd really have liked to see the race with Damien or their comments rather than questions. Okay, so Miss Galoo. Okay, Caroline. Hi, Don. Did I miss an onboard footage from Cape Town to Hobart? Where would I find that? Well, I've been talking to Rob about getting our footage up from Cape Town to Hobart, and it's coming. We got Simon's up, and then we've had all sorts of things going on, but don't worry, it is coming. Okay, and hopefully the next couple of days, Rob is really flat out. So it won't be in the next couple of days, but maybe the end of this week we might start to see them coming through. So it is there. Okay, next one. Joe Lewis, great McIntyre marketing. Hi, Don. With Ian in Tobago, I've been exploring the chart in the area. I'm surprised to see the passage named in honor passage Paso McIntyre. Oh, I didn't know that. Named in honor of your achievements, huh? In the Beagle Channel. I don't know whether there is one there. Maybe there is. He's put a picture in here. Hang on a minute. I'm going to have a look. Oh, cheap as it is too. Look at that. Okay, everyone see that? Passage to McIntyre down there. Yeah, that's when I was down there in my boat, and we said, oh, we should name this after me. Now I've got to get off of this and get on to the questions again. I had no idea that was there in the Beagle Channel. Ian won't pass it. It is further west where the Beagle Canal splits into the north and the south branch. I've got to look into that, see what it is. They sail from Germany. We sailed from Germany to LSO for the start of the GGR and our 70-year-old catch, and we'll be in. Oh, okay, yeah, that makes sense. All right, sorry, we had a bit of a diversion there. I honestly didn't see that before, and I was just joking. I got no idea where that came from, but I'll try and find out just for fun. Leon Fox, joking as in the name of the thing. The question was real. Is it within the race rules if Kirsten were to find out her position from other boats in the area by ham radio? No, no, it's not, because we don't allow ham radio transmissions from the boats. You know what I mean? And maybe someone knows someone who can pass a message from me. Nudge, nudge, wink, wink, say no more. Well, I got to say, I'm surprised she hasn't heard exactly where she is as well, because there's various ways it can happen. She's talking to any other entrants. Most of the other entrants know what's going on. They talk between each other, so there's a bit of a loop there. Peter at Passage Guardian has been, he knows he shouldn't be telling entrants that stuff. So he hasn't, to the best of my knowledge, he hasn't been giving them any extra stuff that he shouldn't do normally, because normally a coast radio station, it's quite interesting. Normally a coast radio station, in their license, they're not meant to be broadcasting bits and pieces if the person doesn't want to. It's all confidential. This is a little bit different, but I'm pretty sure that Pete understands what that is as well, and it's part of the isolation thing. You don't want to give them anything that can upset all that. So it's one of those things. But no, we don't allow ham radio transmissions and so on in the GGR. So there's other ways you can get them, but apparently it hasn't happened yet. So okay, next one from Franz. Oh, that's Franz Lutz. Hang on, this is an in-house question. Franz is the manager of Goog. I think that's right. Yeah. With Lutz buying a boat, announcing his intention to enter 2026 race, which boat is Sebastian buying? Okay, he's already got a boat. He's got a classic 35-footer that hasn't got handy. If you stand up in his boat, you get about that high, right? It's a low freeboard, classic, really beautiful sailing boat as well, 35-footer. So, but he ain't doing the GGR in 26. Well, not to the best of my knowledge, anyway. Okay, Joanne, I just watched your video. Oh, jeepers, just watched your video from 2018 with an explanation of the Windvane and Servo pendulum. Great video. Oh, that's the one. It's on YouTube. It's had 100 and something thousand views, where I talk about the Wind Pilot, which is a Servo pendulum Windvane system, and I talk about the Hydrovane, which is an auxiliary rudder type system, and give a good explanation. And everyone loves it for some reason. I just talked about it, but I've had a long history with Windvanes, and it was quite interesting. Anyway, she says, great video. Does either Windvane particularly work best on one boat or the other? Well, before I go further, first of all, yes and no. They both work okay on either, but there are some situations where if you have a boat like Tapio's, Gear 36, a classic S&S design and long keel, but the rudder is way in from the back of the boat. It's about 2/3 the way from the bow. It's so far underwater that when you're putting rudder inputs, plus the rudder itself is on an inclined angle. So when you have a rudder post that goes on an angle, it's nowhere near as efficient if you've got a rudder post that's vertical. When the rudder post is vertical, the rudder just turns like that and you get steering moment. But when it's on an angle, when the rudder turns, it's either trying to lift the boat or sink the boat at the same time as it's applying a little bit of steering moment. And so in those situations, if you've got a servo pendulum system with a swinging blade in the water and ropes that go through to the tiller, as the tiller's turning, you're still steering the boat through the ship's rudder, which is way forward. Now, if you put an auxiliary rudder system right at the back of the boat, right, it's a smaller rudder, but it's vertical. It's very efficient. It's got great increase in leverage. That's an obvious improvement, and Tapio's spoken about that a lot in terms of, he said the difference. He used a wind pilot in 2018, and I'm not bagging the wind pilot. I'm just saying that was, and it went all the way around, so it's fine. But it was a servo pendulum driving through his rudder. He swapped it for a Hydrovane for this edition of the race, and he said the difference was huge. Instead of the boat steering like that, it was steering a straight course because the leverage is at the back. He could run spinnakers with it and all the rest of it, whereas previously in the Southern Ocean, he had major problems trying to keep control of the boat under Windvane. So he's got his foot steering, and he was foot steering all the way. He had ropes connected to his feet. He'd stand in his little dodger thing there and move his feet and steer from inside to assist the Windvane when it's going. So that's a classic case where an auxiliary rudder system is better for that particular design feature of those sort of old style boats. And realistically, when I decided to come up with the GGR, I had a Tradewind 35, and most of the people with Tradewind 35s had Hydrovanes on the back. And I knew about the Hydrovane, and it's the natural boat for that because whilst the rudder isn't as extreme as the Gear 36, it's still fairly bit inward, and you've got this sort of overhang stern and all the rest of it. And so I decided I would go with a Hydrovane Windvane, and it's got some other advantages as well. But both will do the job of any boat. That's the whole thing. So the quick answer there is yes. That's the first part of the answer. You can use either on any boat. Could you put two identical boats side by side with a servo pendulum on one and a auxiliary rudder wind on the other, and either boat have an advantage? There's some situations where I would suggest that sometimes a servo pendulum system may be an advantage. If you've got a really high performance boat, and what happens with high performance boats, you've got a fin keel and an outboard rudder, a rudder right at the back, deep skinny one on a skeg or whatever it is. They're really flighty, right? They have all this, they'll turn on their spot when you're racing and things like that. Now you got the slow clunkers like the GGR, and then you've got the Imoca 60s like the Vendée Globe, right? They're the two extremes. You get to a point when you're moving away from a clunker, you're starting to get more and more efficient, and you'll have fin keels and you'll have a skeg with a rudder on it and so on, where they're still not super fast because you need to have an apparent wind speed on the boat to activate your flip-flop vane. And if they're too light and too fast, often when the wind starts moving after the beam, it gets very hard for any wind vane to steer because there's not enough apparent wind difference in relation to their boat speed. They'll start going very fast, which means they get really, active on the steering. But the apparent wind is so low that you wipe off the effect of the wind vane, and you can't use a wind vane. You've got to use electric autopilot. But some of the ones that are just ahead of that are flighty and so on, having a servo pendulum system may give you a slight edge on fast maneuvering with the tiller and all that sort of stuff. But it's a borderline thing. And I say that with respect to both of them. My favorite servo pendulum system, I make no bones about this, my personal opinion, got nothing to do with the GGR, is the Aries Windvane. If I had to choose between a servo pendulum system or an auxiliary rudder system, I'd be choosing between the two, an Aries and the Hydrovane. And they both have their place, and the Hydrovane's also got an auxiliary rudder. And I'll just throw in there, the rules for the GGR were devised and finished, signed, sealed, and delivered many, many months. In fact, it was probably nearly 9 months before we actually took Hydrovane on as a partner for the GGR. And that's the way it is, and it's got nothing to do with the fact that. And people now, I saw a comment the other day, people saying, "Oh, because we've got to have an emergency rudder off the boats, it's easier for people to buy a hydrovane." Yes, that could be true, but it's not the driving force behind that. The entrants that are choosing the hydrovane are choosing it based on performance and the strength of the system and so on. And this edition has been very interesting, to say the least. But you can see that the issues sometimes are human driven, and even in Ian's case, with yes, they're nuts and bolts there. And if you don't keep up with the nuts and bolts, and the same with anything, like a helicopter is like an accident waiting to happen, unless you do, because I've owned a helicopter, flown a helicopter, unless you do the maintenance, and rotors on a helicopter go like that a lot, right? So you have to be really particular and make sure you do all your maintenance, right? And a Windvane is going like that for millions of cycles, okay? And the best manufacturer in the world is not going to put anything on the back of the boat. So that's it. Don't touch it. You get back there at the end of 30,000 miles. You have to look after it. And you have to check every nut and bolt on there. And you have to do your maintenance. And you have to carry your spares for cycling things and all that sort of stuff. And if you do, your Windvane, no matter what brand it is, will look after you. So there's a lot of interesting stuff. And the interesting thing about the GGR, it's an amazing platform to show people what's going on, not only with the equipment, but with the way the equipment is managed, okay? And I can look at this pretty straightforward and say to you that Simon had storm damage for his hydrovane, which was really unfortunate. It broke. The top of the casting snapped, and that was a failure of the hydrovane, and it probably shouldn't have happened, okay? But it's only ever happened apparently about 3 times before, and apparently that was possibly in marinas with things getting smashed and so on, not at sea, but it happens. A lot of other stuff that happens, and if nuts and bolts are coming undone on the system, to me that's human error. Okay, that's the skipper should be aware of that, should be watching, should mark actually mark the nuts with some nail polish, and then they can just look at it and see if it's starting to come undone and keep up with it. And so there's a difference between the unit failing versus human induced error or bad luck, like Damien's was just a classic where his safety line on the blade came undone and he didn't see it. And then the second rudder failure, he lost the blade because the rope wasn't there. It just killed him, it was just so sad. But that's the luck of the draw, where do you do it? Anyway, we're spending a bit too much on this question. Okay, Lachlan, when you're describing recently how a Windvane works, I think you hinted that sailing under Windvane is slower than if you use the tiller and steer yourself. Well, absolutely it is. Going to windward at night, the Windvane can be a lot faster because it's sensing the breeze, and going to windward, a Windvane will hunt really well. I've sailed a lot under Windvane stuff, and you can sail better than me going to windward, because it just does. You think about it. Wind is sensing it. It follows every wind shift, every little lift and knock, that it can just be fantastic going to windward. On the beam, it's just raw power, and it doesn't matter so much. This is the wind on the beam. It doesn't matter so much if the boat's wobbling a little bit, because there's a fair bit of latitude in terms of the trim and boat speed. But when you do wobble a little bit, you're sailing further distance, like our gentleman sailor, like Ian Herbert Jones, But when you get the wind behind you, the apparent wind drops off, so the flip-flop vane's not getting as much power, but the speed is still there, so the steering's working. You can have really extreme this sort of stuff, and it's obviously quicker to go a straight line. So when that's happening, you can pick up 10%. 10% is a good rule. So if you hand steer for 10 miles, which is 2 hours, you're probably going to pick up a mile extra because you've sailed a straighter course because you're hand steering. So that's true. Okay. Is this the case, and what proportion of the time do you think entrants use Windvane as opposed to hand steering? Jeepers, if I could use a Windvane on the GGR, I'd use the Windvane every time because it's more comfortable and more fun. But if you want to go a bit faster, you've got to decide to hand steer. On my little tracker, when I did the transatlantic for 3,000 miles or something, I just wanted the Windvane to steer all the time, and pretty much it did. I'd steer for fun every now and then, but it's just something quite pleasant when you're out there. Anyway, I was in seniors division, I was by myself, so it's up to the skipper how much they want to steer by hand and how hungry they are for a win and things like that. So does Simon hand steer more than others, since he consistently seems faster than everyone else? I've never asked him how often he's hand steering, but I would say yes. He would probably hand steer if he's got the energy and he's feeling fit and it's not too cold and windy out there. I think he'd just enjoy the performance aspect of hand steering. So I would think that Simon is hand steering whenever he feels like it, and because he feels like going fast, even though he's cruising, he probably does it a bit more than many. But I don't think he'd wear himself out with it. He knows how to manage his own energy levels and things like that. So he's pretty sensible and he's consistent and he's safe. So that's part of the game. Leda, I'm curious about those who competed in the GGR 2018 and were not around in 22. Do you know what they're currently doing and what happened to their boats? Does any of them, skippers and or boats, have plans to come back to 26? Oh boy, I should have a list here. I should have brought that. It's a bit hard to go through, but some of the boats are doing it again this time. Istvan's boat is Puffin, so that's there. Lutz just bought Uku's boat from 2018, so that's his Russell 36. Obviously, Abelish has got cheapers. I've gone blank on his name now. Did 2018. Oh boy, too many names in my head at the moment. But that did the race. And everyone's doing different things. I'll next time I do the Q&A, I'll bring a list of the 2018 entrants and I can give you a rundown of what they're actually doing. But Gregor went and had a family. When he got back, he lost his boat, had a family. Susie Goodall did the same. She's had a family. She's got a little boy, I think it is. What else has happened? Yeah, Istvan is getting ready to go around again. When he got back, he said he'd get into gardening because he'd had enough. He had so many troubles, with the boat and everything else. He said, that's it, I'm retiring. But he's actually got his original boat back, which is a 34-footer, I think, that I met him off Cape Horn in 1990 when I was racing around the world. In the BOC Challenge in 1990, I had a boat called Buttercup, 50-footer, beautiful boat, unsinkable like the Titanic, aluminium, one off. It was really cool. Oh, anyway, and I hear this guy come up on the radio, and it's Istvan, and he was a long way south of me, under sextant, didn't know quite where he was, and trying to miss the islands that Ian just sailed past when he was in the pickle there. And we started up a bit of a friendship, and on the radio for the last of a couple of weeks. We both went around Cape Horn. Anyway, he did his 2-stop solo circumnavigation. He's bought that boat back, and I think he's leaving again in 26 to do another solo. And I think he'll probably try and do it solo non-stop in that original boat. Uku has bought a beautiful big 50-foot cruising boat for him and the family. He's got twin boys, so they're having fun with that boat. Jean-Luc just bought another cruising boat, just bought a deck saloon Jeanneau cruising boat to have some fun. Who else is there? Mark Slats has still got his boat, and he sort of every now and then, up until a year or so before the start, he said, would I get an entry in 22 if I came in? And I said, yep, sure. And he's not selling his boat, so maybe, I don't know what he's thinking. He's doing rowing and marathons and things like that. Who else can I think of? Igor, the Russian, great guy. I like Igor a lot. He had to retire into Fremantle. His boat, which is an Endurance 35, was still sitting there for sale, but their Russian sponsors, friends, came down and just left Perth about a month or so ago to try and sail it back to Russia. And who else is there? There's a few others I forget now. Anyway, we'll look at that next time around. Okay, Ellis, after my question in an earlier Q&A asking Tapio to recommend a good rum, I would like to donate a bottle of Captain Morgan to him. Is there an easy way to do a dollar transfer? Thanks. Yeah, get onto his social media. He's very, very contactable. So just go for his Facebook page, or you can get his skipper profile off here and you'll see his website. So just get onto him. He'd love to have a bottle of Captain Morgan. Roger, hi from Boston. Don, do you think Ian has a spare Hydrovane rudder on board? Yes, I do. And will he need to get one in Porter Williams? No, he's got it on board. Also, have you spoken to Ian since he anchored? No, I haven't, but I'm just waiting for a phone call now. Just wondering how he's doing since he's posted no daily texts and stuff. Must be exhausted. Well, he's actually got this team alongside him, and he's rafted up, workshop on the boat. It all sounds like a pretty cool situation, and quite a lot of fun. And I'll get the names of the people involved there, because they're Susie and someone on a boat called X, I forget now. But it's pretty cool what they're doing. Okay, Susan. Hi, Don. Just wondering when you are going to add more of the summary highlights, so the timeline on the website, because I don't see the date that Simon and Michael round at Cape Horn. Okay, Mike, Simon and Michael, yeah, okay, so we've got official dates for that. It's on the news press releases, and Ian got round at 5 o'clock in the morning. As I said, yeah, Rob's been flat out these last few days, so a little bit behind on the summary timeline, which you can access from the boxes at the front where it says to follow the race. So we'll catch up with that very soon. Barb, how will the large and early Sargassum bloom interrupt progress of the sailors this year? It shouldn't be too bad. For those who don't know, the Sargasso Sea, I'll never forget it because I heard about the Sargasso Sea for the first time when I read Sir Robin's book, Word of My Own, writing about that whole issue going around in the original Golden Globe. And I thought, that's crazy, having all this weed floating around there. And the pictures there, they're entrenched in my brain. And since then, I've sailed through them myself a few times. It's this weed that floats, and it normally gets into certain areas, just a small area. And the square rig ships used to get into it and get, all hooked up and stuff. But now there's a huge bloom of it. It's the width of America, like massive. And it's causing all sorts of environmental issues and going across. It won't have any real effect anyway on the GGR fleet because the displacement boat going through, there's very little to catch up on. The rudders are on the trailing edge of the keel and it just goes straight past. When I went across them a little mini again on Tracker, I had a lot of Sargasso weed here, and I nearly had a big problem because I was down the back trying to scoop it all off my rudder and stuff and pull I've got two fins at the back, not foils, fins that I'd pull up. That got rid of it, but it was around there. And while I was doing that, the boat rounded up because I was under a spinnaker. I had an asymmetric up and all sorts of, hell broke loose. But the class mini 650s, when they were going across, they got hooked up in the weed, and they have kick-up rudders. They have twin rudders that kick up. And some of the boats were out of control, because they couldn't keep the rudder down long enough to get through the weed. It'd just load up and pop one rudder or something like that. So, but for us in the GGR type boats, will have very little effect. So, okay, Jeff, are the competitors towing logs for speed and distance? If so, where does one get a log these days? Yes, they always. It's a requirement in the rules of the race. You have to have a towing log, and you have to have at least 3 impellers and spare lines and so on. And the majority of them are towing them when they get into certain situations where their DR dead reckoning position isn't so critical, where they can guess their speed, and that's easy to do. You get a feel for it after a while. You look over the side and you can say, oh, we're doing 4 knots or 5 knots or 6 knots. Write your log up, keep your DR going. You don't have to look at the log, so you just save your log impeller from wearing out or whatever it is. But generally speaking, at certain times, they've got it in all the time. And it's not hard to find logs. You can just get on eBay, and when you're on eBay, just put in Walker towing log or something, and they pop up regularly. I think I've got 3 systems on standby. I had a couple for my GGR last time in Australia, and I've got one here that we bought for display purposes that we use to show people what they are. From Kevin, I like the twin main sheet setup on some of the boats. I would love to know what parts make up Simon's setup. I think he might have a trimming angle, but I forget now specifically what Simon's is. But if you go to the website and then just scroll down, it says how to follow the race, and you'll see that we've got all the tours on each of the boats. We spend half an hour with a video interviewing the skipper and go all over the boat and the deck gear and all that sort of stuff. So if you look at that, you'll get on the video tour, you'll get an idea of what's going on in the cockpit. And then we got Nora at the time. I said to Nora, go and do a technical shot on every boat. So there's 50, 60, 70, 80 photos of each boat, and you'll see the main sheet system there. So that's the gallery is accessible from the skipper profile on the website. So you can get on any of the boats, hit the skipper profile, go in it, scroll down, you'll see the technical gallery, hit that, and you've got squillions of photos to look at. So that's kind of cool. Jan, the 2 sails in front, don't they interfere with each other? The 2 sails in front, don't they interfere with each other? I think you're referring to, first of all, it's really cool. There's a lot of people watching the GGR now that are not sailors. It's really interesting. So maybe you're a sailor, Jan, I'm not sure, but I'm mindful of the fact that when we're explaining some of this stuff, there's people that aren't sailors and know very little about the boats. They're just following the human story, which is exactly what we always say. So the 2 sails, you're probably referring to the one right out the front, which is the Genoa. It's the biggest one, and it'll be on a furling gear usually. So they can roll it up like a blind on the window, just pull a string in the cockpit, and the whole thing rolls up on that tube going up the mast. And the next one back is what we call a staysail. It's a smaller one, and that's often or usually on hanks, so like little clips that go on the wires that go up, and they actually don't interfere with each other. What happens is when they're sailing, they can ease the sheets, which is a rope at the very edge of the corner of the sail. They can ease that out, and that sail at the front curves around like the wing of a plane. And then the smaller one, which is further inboard, it curves around as well, but there's a big gap in between. And when the wind hits that and slides through that gap, it actually speeds the boat up. It gives you a bigger high and low pressure system on each side, and it pulls the boat forward. That's how the sailing works. The same as a wing of a plane. Imagine getting a yacht and putting it on the side like that, and that's the sails. It's like the wing of a plane. That's what gives it lift. And when you get that lift, when you come up there, that lift is pushing forward, and it'll push the boat forward. A bit complicated, but so they really don't interfere with each other that much. And you can usually, if they do start to interfere, you can change the shape and the size of them. And then when it gets windy, you'll roll up the genoa and just go under the little staysail. So Gina, last question. I know it's hard to estimate, but is there a guess as to when entrants will finish the race in 4 to 6 weeks? Yeah, we're currently saying it'll be in the last week of April, and that'll depend on exactly what happens now. And one of the reasons you can comfortably say that with a degree of accuracy is that when you look at the 2018 edition, and you can go back to the tracker, you can follow the 2018 edition off the website. You'll see when you hit the race, I think it comes down 2018, hit that, you get some story, and then down the bottom, you've got the tracker. And when you do the video replay, you can follow the boats all the way around the world at different times. And if you run that back, that from the equator back to Les Sables d'Olonne, the average speed is about 30 days. It's about a month, about 4 weeks from the time, well, it's actually not the equator, but the time they get the other side of the doldrums. So depending on what happens in the next few days will start to dictate when they're likely to get up there. So and I think that's the last question. Yeah, it is. So that's all good. I'll have a quick scan through here of the comments and see if there's a link to all of Don's live Q&As now on the GGR homepage. Oh, it's Rob. Here's me telling everyone how busy Rob is. He's just done a link on there. So if you want to look at all the Q&As, it's there. Thanks, Rob. Jean-Pierre Bruno. I can't do the French translation here. I can't see what that one is. Sorry. Probably Mark Cobble. Do the GGR races have AIS? Yes, they do, but not the traditional stuff that you see on everyone else's boats. They have an AIS transponder, which doesn't have a readout. Okay, so to set it up and put all the data in and get it going, they use an iPhone. Because so you can read the iPhone and get the data, but then when they're all set up and done, they got to leave the iPhone home, so they can't see it. And will the ocean races IMOCA be able to see them? And what's the risk of a collision? Yeah, the IMOCAs I mentioned this morning, in the ocean race, they're coming around Cape Horn. There's basically no one out there. They've gone past Guy already, and Ian's not in there yet. They'll be past by the time he sticks his head out. And then Goog is up the top. Then it'll be Jeremy's next. So, yeah, they can see their AIS, but they should be having a look out anyway. But anyway, that's odds on, touch wood, like the lottery, eh? So hopefully there's no collisions. Yeah. What's the risk of collision? Minuscule. In fact, lower than minuscule. How to take care about depressive psychology of sailors in the doldrums? Oh, that's not about the doldrums. It's about the whole race. After the glamour starts to wear off when you get to the doldrums the first time going down the Atlantic, and by the time you're looking at getting up to Cape Town, it's getting pretty severe, because you really have to be doing this challenge for the right reasons, and it's tough. I say this often, that there's nothing to compare anything with any other sporting event in the world. This is crazy. Completely isolated on your own for over 200 days, 240 days or something, and can't speak to family and friends except for little snippets every now and then, and it's a mental grind. So and it usually sorts itself out, because if you're not in it for the right reasons, or you really don't want to be there, you'll find a reason to pull out. And so it is tough. This is very tough. And it's nothing we can do. We're on standby, we're watching and things like that, but it's really, that's what the GGR is about. I have a question about the video footage of Kirsten. While I enjoyed it a lot, I thought it was way too dangerous to hang on the stern without a safe line. What's your take on that? It's entirely up to the skipper. You set your own risk mitigation and you set your own standards. And to give you an idea, Robert Knox Johnson on Sir Haley was even worse. He'd be sailing along on Sir Haley. He'd just jump over the side and swim beside the boat. Well, la-di-da-di-da, all kind of cool. And then he'd hope he'd grab the back of the boat and climb back on board. That's what he used to do. So Kirsten's being very conservative and very safety conscious by hanging on to the ladder. But yes, I know what you're saying. But I mean, the whole issue about wearing safety harnesses and all that sort of stuff, I regularly didn't wear a safety harness on my little Mini because my perception at the time was the risk didn't. My risk assessment was such that I didn't think I needed to do it. And Kirsten's incredibly fit and healthy and a strong swimmer. Well, hard to swim at 5 knots, but she just decided that's what she wanted to do, and she's comfortable with that. So be it. So that's the beauty of the ocean and the race. There's a tremendous amount of freedom there, and so on. So thanks, John, for your patience with all our silly questions. No, they're all fun. Love to share your passion for this amazing. Yeah, cool. I mean, I always like to know what people think. So yeah, I appreciate the comments and stuff. Donna, it's such a pleasure to wake up each morning with an episode of your race update. Well done. Thanks. That's cool. Glad you're enjoying it. I'm curious about the modified underbodies on boats in the GGR allowed. No, it's not. You can't modify anything. It's a production boat race. So the design you choose, that's what you got, and you have to stick with it. We allow fairing in of skin fittings. The rudders have got to be identical. You can't make a bigger for the prop and so on. You can't change anything underwater at all. So at what cost braking equipment? Not sure what you mean by that. But yeah, you don't want equipment to break because that could ruin your whole race. You are freezing, but on the screen. Oh, that's a worry. I hope this is still going because because I'm using the phone and this is the internet for that as well. Oops. Anyway, hopefully it's all cool. All right, I'm at holy dooly, 51 minutes. See you later. I'll just get this on and I'll see you tomorrow morning if all goes well.